All right, thanks everyone for sticking around for our next talk, which is going to be an exciting one. It's called Data, the New Digital Asset Class. It's being given by Anna Kaz, who is working on a project named Vana, and it's going to be pretty interesting. So please welcome to the stage, Anna.
Great, thank you. Great, just waiting for some slides up here. But in the meantime, oh, perfect, thank you. So yeah, hey, I'm Anna. I'm from Vana. Quick intro on me. I got interested in crypto more through traditional currency. So I was really into central banks as a kid and in high school. Like, I had a picture of Janet Yellen, chair of the Fed, in my high school bedroom, and then worked at the Fed in high school, got to MIT and learned about decentralized currencies. This was 2015, and was just so fascinated by the idea of being able to basically run a central bank in your dorm room, kind of fully distributed. So started mining ETH, was part of the early MIT Bitcoin Club. Some of the economics research I was doing led me to actually kind of econometric models and then to some kind of AI models. So started doing research at CSAIL, which is MIT's AI lab, in the field of natural language processing. And I always wanted more and more data to be able to train AI models on. Great, so this presentation is going to start with kind of a view of how data fits into AI, and then go into specifically Vana's role. AI models are ultimately only as good as their training data. So this is the training data for GPT-3. It's slightly old because now the AI companies don't say exactly what they train on, but it's pretty representative. So you have Common Crawl, which is basically the whole publicly scraped internet. So everything that Google can index, that's basically the data set. WebText2 is another kind of public data set. It's basically all Reddit links with more than 3 upvotes. Go and scrape all of that text. You can kind of think of an AI model as a kid that's learning from experiences, and its experiences are the data that you put in front of it. If you've posted on Reddit, you might have already helped contribute to AI models, since that is included, at least the older sort of posts on Reddit, in some of the older data sets. What a lot of people don't realize is that most data is actually not publicly available. So this slide is going through kind of most public data, but it's actually only that tiny little dot right there. It's less than 0.1% of all the data kind of overall. So internet data is mostly living behind kind of permissions or sign in to access. If you think about, I don't know, your daily life on the internet, your emails, your Google Docs, your messages, most stuff is not publicly available, right? Most stuff you have to sign into to actually be able to access. So the data represents a very small subset, what we've taught AI so far. One of the issues that we're running into from an AI research perspective is called the data wall. And what the data wall refers to is the fact that we're actually running out of data to train AI models on. So what this graph is showing is AI models as they've gotten better and better, and how much training data they're trained on. In AI, the training data size is measured in a token, which is basically just a word. It's unrelated to crypto tokens. So Llama 3 was trained on about 15 trillion words. And if you look at the whole public internet, so that's FineWeb, it's a subset of Common Crawl, which is just the high quality stuff, and it's deduped. That is also 15 trillion tokens. So one, it is very impressive that we have basically taught AI literally everything available on the public internet. That's a lot of information to teach an AI model. But if we want to make AI better, then we need access to more data. One note I'll mention is that the data wall is both an issue of quality and quantity. And so if people are familiar, how many people have interacted with DeepSeek or have switched to DeepSeek? Okay, cool. So DeepSeek is really smart, right? And it has this chain of thought of reasoning. Something that they did to overcome the data wall is they actually started with a really high quality subset of data. So they hired a team of PhDs to generate really high quality data of coding and mathematical reasoning. Their founder actually was directly generating some of this data in order to be able to build kind of a better AI model. Here I actually have a job posting from their parent company of them hiring people to do a lot of this high quality data related work. So companies have realized that their data is really important to AI and extremely valuable at this point in time. And so they've kind of locked it down to make sure that they can charge as much money for it, right? So Reddit is earning $200 million from selling data. That came out earlier last year before they were getting ready to IPO. PhotoBucket earning $1 to $2 an image. Apple's paying like $50 million for news data. And generally, this trend that's happening is that platforms that have this really valuable data in their walled gardens is making it harder and harder to access. So Stack Overflow changed their terms of service, Reddit changed their terms of service, and it's becoming increasingly hard to actually access this data set. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that users actually have full legal ownership of all of their data. So in the same way that when you park your car in a parking lot, the parking lot doesn't own your car, right? They can't randomly take your tires, they can't destroy your car. You can always go and get it back. When you put your data into a platform, it is the same sort of legal relationship. Like, it is your data, it's sitting there, and you've signed terms of service that say that they can use it and they can kind of use it to provide you with services. But at the end of the day, you can always go and take your data back as a user. I'll also mention that this is not very widely known. I think the general view and kind of business model of big tech is around treating this data as if it's their own, but it is actually not their own. They just have kind of the terms of service that grant them access to it. So with every single platform you use, you can go and export a full copy of your data. So you can get your Tesla data, you can get your Amazon purchase history. Instagram is actually a really fun one because it gives you both your posts and your messages and photos, but it also gives you the AI-generated labels that they've put onto you for the purposes of advertising. It's like a list of 300 things. One of the labels that they had put on me was stressed but not depressed, and it's actually just like hilarious to go and do this data. So you can Google like Instagram data export and see what they have. So the approach that we're taking at Vana is to basically have users cut through these walled gardens by exporting their own data. Some of the core concepts to understand on Vana are: one, non-custodial data. So you can manage access to your data just like your funds. You can use any EVM-compatible wallet, sign a transaction, and you're basically granting access to be able to grant an application ability to use your data, but you're staying in full control. The other thing that's important is proof of contribution. And so when you work with data, if like we just have my data, it's not that valuable because it's not enough data to be able to train an AI model. But if you have a whole group of people that trains their, that kind of combines their data, then that data becomes a lot more valuable, right? The problem is, like, what if one of us, so we're all going to combine our data, like our Telegram messages or something, and one person pretends to be 100 people to try to kind of like take over control of the data set. So what proof of contribution does is it ensures that data, which is necessarily kind of not fungible, coming into a pool of data called data liquidity pools on Vana, is high quality, and it actually is basically giving a score to each data point relative to another data point. And it's implemented at the data set level. So each data DAO on Vana has a different proof of contribution. So data DAOs are one of the core primitives on Vana that basically allow people to combine their data together. You can think of it as kind of like a labor union, but for data. So what it does is it really incentivizes, aggregates, and cryptographically verifies valuable data. Data contributors retrieve their data from either like via API or a GDPR request. Every data DAO builds their own interface. So there are a bunch of different data DAOs. Some of them have a Chrome extension. Some of them have a standalone UI. Some of them have a scraper. And then the aggregated data can be used to train user-owned AI models or sold as data sets. So a few of the data DAOs I'd mentioned, there's one that's focused on mental health data. There's one that's focused on financial prediction data, and they actually have you export like your Coinbase and your Binance trades, which usually would be stuck within that centralized exchange. So here are some of the data DAOs just to give you a sense of kind of the different directions you can take them. So the Reddit data DAO has 140,000 Reddit users in it. That one was an interesting one where every data DAO on Vana has its own data set specific token, kind of like an ERC20 token. What happened with the Reddit data DAO is early on they had mostly crypto native people joining, coming in. And then people started speculating on the Reddit dataset specific token. And because of that, if you were a user with a lot of karma, because if you get rewarded based on the square root of your karma. If you have more karma, you get more ownership of the data set. Then you could actually make like $300 or $400 for your data. So then there were a lot of people who were totally new to Web3, but had a ton of Reddit data who came in and contributed and built up this really valuable data set. And now there's like an ex-Google brain machine learning engineer who has trained an AI model on the data set. Because it's just trained on Reddit data, it's pretty much just good at like shitposting, but it shows kind of that full end-to-end flow of users contributing data and being able to train a better AI model. The other data DAO I would call out is the 23andMe data DAO. Their goal is actually to buy 23andMe and make it user-owned. I think that 23andMe is now actually at like a $75 million market cap, so it's not insane. But the reason why this is an interesting example of a data DAO is their goal isn't to sell the data, it's actually to prevent 23andMe from selling the data. So you're able to kind of use this collective bargaining power of a group of users. They have a few thousand people in it. If you have a 23andMe account, it could be good to join, to be able to negotiate with the platforms. Reddit actually changed some of their terms of service following the Reddit data DAO, and I think there is a lot of power that users have around kind of aggregating this data. So data on Vana is structured and quality checked. So each DLP, that is the more technical term for a data DAO, defines their data set structure and proof of contribution. And what that means is that all the data that's available on Vana, you know what the structure is going to be, and you know that it's been quality checked. Something like one example of something that you could build with a sleep.fun data set. So you can combine data across different data DAOs, and then you work with it in a TEE, so it's privacy preserving. You could train a model that basically has people's Coinbase and Binance data from Finquarium, and then their sleep data, and you could look at across all token holders, like who is sleeping worse, like of the projects, like who's getting bad sleep these days. So that's one example of something that's possible to build on top of this data. The other thing I would mention about Vana's kind of economic design is our goal is really to turn data into a new asset class. So there's a lot of market failure around data today because it's really weird to work with. It's very illiquid. One of the major bottlenecks there is what we call the double spend problem for data, right? So if I sell you my data, it's very hard for me to know that you haven't then sold my data to somebody else, right? So the way that we've solved this with Vana is that you can only run operations on the data within a secure environment, but the data actually never leaves. So what it looks like is it's closer to renting your data than actually selling it. So each of the data DAOs has its own data set specific token that is created through a data liquidity pool. And contributors earn data tokens by adding verified data. Depending on how valuable your data is to a particular data DAO, you're rewarded proportionally. So to give you some examples, like the Reddit one I mentioned, it's based on the square root of your data. 23andMe one is based on, I think it's equal for everybody. Something else is usually there's some kind of a drop-off curve where if you're in the first 10,000 users to contribute your data, you're rewarded more than if you're like the millionth user, right? And that's because the marginal value that you're providing by adding your data is higher at the beginning. Thinking about like Twitter as an example, if there's somebody who tweets very similar things to you and they've already joined the Twitter data DAO, then your data is potentially not as valuable because that information is somewhat already represented. There's some research related to model influence functions that goes into a bunch of this detail, where you can basically show an AI model a new data point and then get back exactly kind of how much the AI model learns from that given data point. So on the data token mechanics, contributors earn by contributing data, and then companies and researchers basically buy and burn data tokens for access. There's also a really interesting data token ecosystem that's popping up. So there are some data dexes where you can basically trade data tokens. There's someone building a data perps platform. There's plugins so that AI agents can actually trade data. The Web 2 analogy I look at for this is maybe like oil futures, right? So a lot of companies that consume a lot of oil will buy oil futures in order to de-risk the fact that they're going to have to use a lot of oil. We're starting to see a little bit of compute futures where companies will buy compute futures to de-risk that. And so I think in the future, we're going to see these data futures and kind of new financial primitives built on top of data as that underlying asset. So there are DLP incentives on Vana, which are really designed to help onboard data into the network. And what it does is the top 16 DLPs by stake actually earn Vana emissions for onboarding data, which are tied to how many verified data contributions they have and how much their data is accessed. Some of the performance metrics that determine rewards, so data access volume, data quality and value, and amount staked. There's an upcoming upgrade where the incentives will go directly to the DEX pool of the Vana data token pair. Right now it goes into the data DAO and then is distributed. And so that's one upcoming sort of thing to call out. And then here are a few of the different data DAOs. So there's the DNA data DAO, which is focused on raw DNA sequences, MindDAO, which is a mental health data set. Right now on Vana, there are 20 live data DAOs where you can go and kind of contribute your data or stake or participate today. Some of them are venture-backed teams. So DLP Labs, which is the one that created the Tesla data DAO, they've raised about $1 million. They have their first data buyer, who's a battery company, buying access to Tesla data. Some of the other ones are smaller teams, and you can kind of get started relatively easily. And then, so there's the data DAO side, which is basically onboarding data to Vana and bringing data on. It's always pointers to the encrypted data that are stored on chain, and then the proofs and the records so you understand what's in the data. The other side of it is being able to access data, right? So there are two ways to access data on Vana. One is you can access individual data via the data portability API. What that means is that if I've joined a data DAO and say I've connected my sleep data, I can log into another application, sign a transaction, and grant them access to see my sleep data. And what's cool about that is I think especially for AI applications, you often want more and more data on your users to be able to personalize the application to them. So that is at the individual level. The other kind of data access that's available is actually accessing a whole data DAO's data. So that's the example I talked about with the ex-Google Brain machine learning engineer training on a Reddit data set. There's another AI company, Flower AI, that's actually doing full pre-training. That means you're making an AI model from scratch across 3 of the different data DAOs. One of our guiding use cases is how do you get to 100 million users who've all contributed data from 5 different platforms so that you have almost 500 trillion tokens worth of data, which is 30x leading AI models today, and you can train the best foundation model. But most of the kind of use of data today is more around fine-tuning models and smaller models like that. And on the 100 million goal, we're about 1% of the way there. It is a massive undertaking, but that's kind of one of the guiding principles. I'll also mention that only the outputs can leave unencrypted, ensuring the underlying data stays private. So the data DAO actually has to approve the code that runs in the secure environment, right? So you can't just be oh, I'm going to go run code in the secure environment that just sends all the data somewhere else. The code has to get approved so you make sure that it never leaks. So if you want to get started building on Vana, here are the steps to start a data DAO. You can also access data. First is picking out a data source and how users will contribute. Something to mention is that you don't need anybody's permission to start a data DAO because users own their own data, right? If you want to start a Pinterest data DAO, you don't have to go ask Pinterest or get API access or anything because every user has their individual data access. Reddit actually tried to shut down the Reddit data DAO around when it hit 100,000 users, but because of the way that it works on Vana, where individual users are getting their own data, you don't need anyone's permission. The user has that legal right. And then you can build and deploy The majority of the work is in the proof of contribution, which is the Python code verifying data. And then you can build an interface for users to contribute data. There are a bunch of different open source templates. This one links to a web app, but there's also a miner. If you look at the Twitter data DAO, that's all open source, and you could reference some of that, and a Chrome extension. And then you can register and launch your data DAO. You don't have to compete for a spot in the top 16. You can also just run a data DAO. And most teams are 2 or 3 people. Build takes a few weeks. We also have an accelerator program for data DAOs if you're interested in building. And you can probably create a template one relatively quickly. Great. Thank you so much.